Hello, my name is Simone and you are very welcome at today's We Are Power monthly webinar. And this month we are talking about mental health well-being, a topic that is a global issue, a topic that doesn't seem to be going away, but even more importantly, well, we're talking about it today. I'm joined by our stellar panelists, 3 stellar panelists. One is en route, and we'll talk about the issues that come with travelling when Lucy joins us in a short while. But as we all know, mental health is one of the most critical global issues that we face, with 1 in 4 adults in England experience a mental health issue annually. Life expectancy is 15 to 20 years shorter for those with severe mental illnesses, and 60% report the cost of living crisis impacts their well-being. 1 in 5 school-age children have mental health difficulties, with only a third of those. So 1 in 5 have difficulties, but only a third of those are receiving treatment or diagnosis. And 15% of UK workers have diagnosed mental health conditions. And as I say, I'm joined by a brilliant panel today. I've got Dr. Catherine and Dr. Jack is the doctor panel today, 100%. And Lucy will be joining us hot footing from a delayed Northern Drill. I can't believe that. Surely not. But you are so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Cool. And to be to be accompanied with 2 absolutely stellar panelists. I couldn't for 1 minute begin to even try to summarise your biographies because you were so well accomplished. Catherine, can you tell us about yourself and why this is such a critical area that you're so involved in?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here, and it's really important to be talking about mental health. And I'm trained consultant psychiatrist, work in the north of England. And through my practice, I've seen the impact on mental health, not just on the individual, but families as well, and across the lifespan. So I think it's really important that we're talking about this. I'm specialized in addiction. And again, I see children and adults, and also whether they have mental health problems or not. I also assess and treat people who have adults with ADHD. And as a way of making, doing that holistic approach, I've also trained in lifestyle medicine so that we're offering lifestyle prescriptions as well as medication and talking therapies for those that need it.
Wow. I mean, I'm always overwhelmed by the individuals that we talk to across this community and the number of paint plates that are continually spinning. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Jack.
Hi, my name's Dr. Jack. Thank you for having me here. It's really nice to be here, and I'll talk about myself to the end of days. But my expertise really is in the world of sport and inclusion, accessibility in sport, but also the world of sport for development and peace. So I've run and led conflict resolution work in Israel, Palestine. Didn't go well. Could have gone better in different parts of Africa, in Australia, Fiji. And more recently, I've been looking into the world of mixed martial arts and male mental health within that. So these are all findings, the things that I've found whilst using sport as a conduit to get people to speak candidly about how they feel about the world they live in and how they interact with each other and different communities. And yeah, we're in a crisis at the moment, and we've been in a crisis for quite some time. So I think it's a really important time to have this conversation.
And there's no one that is not touched by this, are they?
No, not at all. There's I've got examples and stories I can tell from women in Fiji, in Indian Fijian women who have spent a lot of time talking to and listening to their stories, and white men in England. It's no one is untouched by this I guess new pandemic, new epidemic, or that's been going on. And I think that there's really, really diverse communities all faced with the same underlying problems, and I think that's where we need to find solutions and have conversations around these
and it is, how do we find the solutions? We have 40 plus minutes to find those solutions, but
easy, no problem.
We want to, we always want our webinars for our watchers and our people on catch up to be able to take away actions and sort of real constructive things that they can do. So if you've got any conversations or any questions, please do drop them in the chat and we'll come to you. And please do join the conversation, whether you're watching now or you're watching on catch up. Use the hashtag WeArePower. And I know Catherine and Jack will rejoin the conversation on our socials as well, because we cannot ignore the cost of ignoring this is, well, it's infinite, isn't it?
True. And just listening to the figures that you shared at the beginning, it's staggering. and it's not anything we should ignore. There's a cost to ignoring it, and not just financial, but also in terms of life.
And what are some of the common ways that employees' mental health issues manifest in the workplace? Because often it can start as really simple things, can't it?
Yes, just like anything else, it doesn't happen overnight. Gradually, you might see somebody's mood changing or their behavior, the demeanor changes, perhaps maybe isolating themselves, maybe becoming more irritable than usual, maybe causing complaints from colleagues, and all that can happen. And then their stress levels, maybe they're not sleeping so well at night. Then you get into the absenteeism, maybe having sick days off, or even when they're in work, the presenteeism. So they're there, but not really there because they're not focused. Performance goes down as well. So there's a cost to the organization, but also the cost to the individual.
And there are hidden costs, aren't there, Jack?
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? When if you like look at the relationships that you've had at work, or the relationships you've had at work over the years, and different places that I'm sure you've both worked, or in preparation for this podcast, I started like reanalyzing a lot of working relationships that I've had with people that I've disliked, or really difficult people, and then you just think to yourself, were they happy deep down? Were they struggling with something? And I think that's a good way to sometimes approach people, isn't it? From a mental health perspective and I guess a holistic health perspective, thinking like, are these people that you work alongside who are difficult? Are they struggling with something? And that's not always obvious at all. And it might come across as people being abrasive or people being difficult or things like that. And I think that there's so many hidden examples which are hard to spot, but I think it starts with being a little bit more empathetic. But that itself is quite difficult if you yourself are suffering with things, not just depression, but also just a bit of stress. Stress is a real problem, and I think it's a key to like a lot of underlying issues that we face that are both mental and physical. I don't need to tell you about this, Catherine, do I? But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
And you're a researcher, right? So is curiosity the start of this?
Yeah, I think so. So the curiosity is key, and I think I have a critical mindset to things. I say this to my students all the time. Like, being critical about the world we live in isn't being miserable. Isn't being like looking for negativity everywhere. It's looking at stuff and thinking that this can be better. We can do better than this. So we can critique it and look at for solutions. So the traditional ways of approaching mental health, approaching with someone with mental health, they just don't seem to be working. Quite linear ways. So through curiosity, we can look at ways in which people connect to each other more authentically, rather than just sitting opposite someone saying, "Are you sad? Tell me why you're sad." To think about their whole life and their whole existence and their whole way they interact and connect to the world. But being curious about that is a great way to start, I think.
And it is a start. And I think we always want the practical, and we always want people watching, to go, actually, you know what? I've noticed that person, whether it be on the bus or the delayed train or in the office every day. But there's something, but I don't want to trigger something. Should people, can be curious? Are there any other sort of tips that you would recommend?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's about, like Jack said, about being curious. Often when somebody asks you, "How are you?" what's the answer? It's usually fine.
Yeah, great.
Fine.
Yeah,
And sometimes that bears no resemblance to what's actually going on. And I think that curiosity, so what is going well? When you say fine, what's going well? But then if somebody's behavior has changed, they're withdrawing and perhaps more irritable than usual, it's about thinking, what's happened with them? What are they grappling with? So being curious like that and having those open conversations, I think then people can open up, and if they can trust and follow what's going on, they're much more likely then to get the help that they need.
Is there, if I can ask, sorry, Catherine, is there a way to go about that curiosity, like a good way and a bad way? Because some people might get more irritated if you can. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? I guess it's the way you ask these questions, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the way that you ask the question, like the example that you've just given.
What's wrong with you? Why are you late again?
Exactly. It's about asking those open-ended questions, so that invites a response. And when they do, maybe with another open question, and then reflecting to them, I hear you said ABCD, sort of they feel that they are understood, they've been heard. Those open questions in an empathic manner rather than prodding, I think those are the ones that open up the conversation.
because there was a whole piece at one point which was, "Are you okay?" And
Mm.
you know, obviously, yeah, I'm fine. But it's almost like you have to ask it twice, if not 3 times.
Well, this is what the thing I'm again curious about is that, like, are you okay? Is that enough?
Yeah.
Is it because that's a campaign that's been going on for a while, and I think it's a really useful campaign. But is that enough? And is that going to get people to open up or be honest with themselves, you know, about what they're going through?
Jack, what have you seen as some of the effective strategies? Because I think whether you're a small organisation, a large organisation, and particularly global organisations have so many different strategies and techniques and sometimes initiatives that come and go. Have you seen things that are really effective?
Yeah, well, so I've worked in different parts of the world, mainly in academia, mainly in Australia and then in the northwest, the UK, vastly different contexts, to be honest, weather-wise particularly. And there's, I think, going back to that term, something I said earlier about authenticity, is that large companies might have, and one I've worked for, which I won't name, is they say, we're having a mental health week. This week is the week where we're going to talk about mental health this week, and then the rest of the year, we're not. That's it. You should be fine the rest of the year. You know, it's kind of, and that's inauthentic, I think. And a lot of institutions have done things like, what is it, yoga at your desk, or like mindful meetings or something, where you go on Microsoft Teams or Zoom, which can drive you mad, and do mindful work. But I don't think that's authentic stuff. I don't think that's really going to get to the heart of the matter. But that might be someone whose role it is, who's the stress themselves has to tick a box to say they've done something for mental health, you know. So I think authentic methods for me would be the best way forward.
And how do we avoid that tick boxing? Because that you see so much of that.
Yeah. I think, yes, about training the managers, training the whole staff, just so that they are aware, not necessarily that they should become therapists, but they should be aware in identifying, you know, the subtle signs that may be going on, with a view to signposting. And if people are aware, then they're more likely to do something about it. Examples that you've given about, you know, almost like a tick box exercise, but it's not just May mental health month, mental health week, and then forget. It's about, what do we implement as organizations? Some organizations will have mental health champions who are spread out across the organization. Some organization, like where I work, we have mental well-being, you know, well-being hour every week. Every employee gets that once a week to do something towards their well-being. And then the sessions about mindfulness, or, you know, checking in groups where they insist on doing them face-to-face in different. I think it's a good start, and people are opening up and sharing, and getting the staff involved in planning their well-being plan. You know, how does that work for them, so that it's not being done to them, but being done with them.
With them.
Yeah, done to them, done with them. I love that. That's a great saying.
Voluntold.
Voluntold, yeah. These are great. No, yeah, I completely agree with that. It's like we see it with staff that you work with at universities, and again, I've worked in different parts of the world, but also students. Like a decade or more of working with students, you just see the issues that it's just like they're a bit all over the place. A lot of them with anxiety and depression. Substance abuse, you know, it's a real issue with younger people as well. I think that feeds into the whole issue. And like we said about signposting, which is why I thought of it, is because we're, as lecturers, and, you know, we see like all these issues, we're supposed to go, well, let me stop you there, go and speak to wellbeing about that. And you've got someone that's opening up to you. That's what we're supposed to do. But you don't do that, but we're not trained properly. We're just not. And that's an issue which I can completely see in the system.
Which has now led me to 3 questions all at once.
Sorry.
Should we be taught this? You know, should this be really there in school? I know there's lots of well-being in school, but should it be really like properly part of education?
I think so, because we had at school like PSHE lessons, or personal and social health skills, and we used to mess around a lot in those lessons. But particularly post-COVID, we're seeing students and kids come through who spend formative years locked in, which was, you know, the worst possible time to be locked in with your parents when you're young, you know, regardless of your background. And I don't think they're taught skills to be open to the positives of opening up, because they might just say, I think they just say to them, like, you should open up about your mental health. Why? You just should. Okay, you don't see the kind of the benefits of that. There are starting to be more conversations around that, particularly in my expertise is a lot around male mental health, to be honest, in male spaces, because that's been a huge issue. But I think there needs to be better education about what the consequences of not opening up potentially.
Definitely. And you mentioned about the students, university
Mm.
students, and just yesterday I was in a meeting about student mental health in the
Mm.
region, and yes, the figures are staggering.
Yeah, it's bad.
But it's also about, and there's a lot of investment going in. My husband is a lecturer, so he tells me about what's going on everywhere. It's mental health and it's being talked about. I'm not sure about maybe the training for the people who are seeing the students, but bringing the mental health services in the universities, I think that's been a key thing. It's
Yeah,
easily
absolutely.
accessible, but also the preventative side of things as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Mm.
And how does gender, race sort of come into play as well? Because there's different factors, aren't there?
Yes, definitely. And yeah, something which I talk a lot about. I think in terms of the gender side of things, women are much more affected than men. For they're more likely to be stressed and struggle with burnout. There's the gender pay issue leading to financial constraints. And then going to the racial side of things, I can give countless stories about how people have struggled with harassment, the microaggression, lack of progress, and also their own perceived outcomes if they tried anything, and therefore maybe they don't try. So personal stories and stories from other women. So, sort of like the double vulnerability woman, Black woman,
Yeah.
exams, progressing in your career, those kind of things are going on. And therefore, levels of anxiety are greater. And then when it comes to our culture, it's very rare that we seek help because we don't want to be perceived as weak.
Yeah.
We don't want to be perceived as not able to progress because we feel that if we disclose that sometimes we might not get that promotion. Nobody will believe, we believe that we can do it. And therefore, sometimes we keep going and risk that burnout situation.
And that not wanting to say it out loud or ask for help is really prevalent in men, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And this is what I was saying a little earlier about the methods that you can get to men to speak to them, because a lot of my research, if I may talk about this briefly, into mixed martial arts was I moved back from Australia after being years and years away from the country. And there were two things that had changed about the UK in the 5 years I've been away. One was that everyone was drinking gin out of bowls with fruit in, like gin, just gin everywhere. Everyone was just drinking gin. I don't know where it came from. And the second thing was mixed martial arts was huge, like absolutely huge. Like in 2010, there was like 10 mixed martial arts gyms in the UK. Now there's like 350. And I just thought, quite lazily, I knew nothing about it. So I thought, oh, it's just people are becoming more violent and it's a place for men to go and be violent together. And everyone in these gyms is going to have tattoos on their faces and have questionable political opinions about stuff. And I walked into a gym in Liverpool thinking that I'd find this, and I just was the opposite of what I thought I'd find. It was the most inclusive and diverse place, sporting culture that I'd ever researched. And I've researched sporting cultures in like surf cultures in Sydney and rugby cultures in Fiji and football in South Africa and West Africa. And by far the most inclusive place was a mixed martial arts gym in the docks in Liverpool. You had doctors, lawyers, people who make their make their money in ways that are illegal in the UK. You had women, men. You got young girls in hijabs doing Muay Thai boxing, but in like sort of like sporting hijabs. And I was just like, that just is crazy. But through that research, I trained with some of the top fighters. I've trained for a year without speaking to anyone. No, I spoke to them normally, like a normal person, but without interviewing anyone. And then after a year or so, sat down with some of the top fighters who were mainly men. I did speak to women, but I made my research more about men because I spoke to that group mainly, and I didn't want to make findings based on just a handful of women that I spoke to. And I said, why do you do this to yourselves? Because you get injured. You've got to be there 3-4 times a week. It's hard on relationships. It's pretty expensive. You get, it's all these things. And they all spoke about mental health. All the men spoke about anxiety, depression, feeling like lost. A lot of them a lot of them are sober, don't drink anymore, don't smoke anymore, don't smoke tobacco anymore, don't all this stuff. And I was like, I had a lad to tell me, he won't mind me saying his name, but I won't. He said he'd priced up his own funeral, decided where he was going to do it. He'd picked a spot. Just before he went to Costco, which was next to the gym, and went, actually, I'm going to go and try this, just one more. And he's now a coach there, and he's engaged, and he's just turned his life around completely. And it's through this, it's a I think it's mainly men, but I can't speak for women. I really can't, apart from women in other countries, potentially some research I've done there. But the three things they felt they needed were a sense of community, and authentic communities or relationships, and people they could rely on and felt relied upon as well. Personal development, so being able to work on themselves and see achievement, and being able to harness coping skills and to cope with life outside the gym in a much more calmer, sort of stress-free way. And I just thought that's really beautiful that this gym is able to do that for you. But what kind of society have we made that makes this a worthwhile choice to go in and train in mixed martial arts to be able to cope with the world that we've created? And those are the main crises I think with a lot of men, is they don't have a sense of purpose, a sense of place, and a lack of community. But compared to women, they're still not suffering as much. I'm not sitting here saying that we've got to watch out for men, because I think that we've had a lot of emphasis on men, but there is still that crisis there as well. I think both things can be true, can't they?
And Catherine, you talked earlier about the prevention. At what part of that research that you came across do you think these men were making decisions to do this based on prevention? How much was prevention versus reaction?
Well, it's a good question. It was difficult to say. I had quite a few. There was one fella, John, who said I've sacrificed my physical health for my mental health, because he's injured his knees, elbows, and whatever. And and a lot of them, when I wrote an article about jiu-jitsu, particularly being like therapy, even the head of the gym messaged me, just said, we all miss our therapy so much. And this was during lockdown. So, because I was really worried about a lot of the people at the gym during lockdown, because that for them was, they'd go to the gym for an hour and a half, 2 hours at times, wrestle with each other, box, whatever, even do yoga as well. They do yoga sessions. And then that was them releasing, and they hang out, talk about things, not necessarily mental health things, but share stories, and then come home and feel like they're part of something, they're connected to people in an authentic way. And I really think that's where, and Catherine will be able to talk about this a lot more, but I think that's where there's a lot of problems with mental health, is people feel disconnected and they feel lonely.
Yeah. That loneliness, you've talked about loneliness a few times. Is that what's come up in yours?
There's an epidemic of loneliness, and
totally related.
Yeah, totally related. And when you look at what these men and women are doing, they're engaging in physical exercise. And as we know, physical exercise is like a natural antidepressant, isn't it? It boosts your well-being, releasing those endorphins which help with mental well-being. The other thing you've mentioned is the connection.
Yeah.
When people connect, when you look at the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, one of them is connection. And the research has shown that when they followed graduates from the Harvard School over 80 years, they found that the biggest number one indicator for longevity and happiness was the connection.
Wow.
Yeah. More than even money and success.
Yeah. And that's what we talked about. One, I think, community, authentic relationships.
Well, these are three things that I thought, okay, authentic relationships, personal development, community. I've seen that somewhere before, and it was in a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it was essentially a Buddhist book which talked about the key pillars of mental health. And that was they just emerged organically from what people were telling me.
What probably didn't come up in your research was delayed trains. I
don't think
so. And if you just forgive us a second, we're just going to take a slight pause while we get our lovely Lucy in on a microphone, and we'll be back with you in just a second. Well, as if by magic, I'm delighted to welcome Lucy Power, MBE. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Lovely to meet you both. Lovely to see you again.
It's so lovely to see you. So lovely to see you. But joking aside, you have kind of hot-footed across from the other side of the Pennines.
Yes.
But travel, the simplicity of travel and delays can add to the stress and the mental health.
Yes, I'll state the obvious. It's a huge, massive irony that I work in the railway industry.
No, I didn't.
And I'm here because I travelled by train because I want to do my best for the planet and all of that good stuff. But yeah, unfortunately, there's a signaling delay between Manchester and Liverpool, hence being late, and then a massive taxi queue rank. So we had a really, really good cabbie though who did whisk me here as quickly as he could. But it really does cause stress. It really does cause stress. So.
And how did you cope with that on the way? Because I know we were like, okay, just messages, tell it's okay,
Well, in keeping with what we're talking about mental health today, and just thinking I've recently changed jobs and at a company called Mental Wealth Company. And one of the things I've had a real deep dive into really quickly is the impact of psychological safety. So to bring that right back here, I mean, Faye was absolutely fantastic. It was, calm down, you're absolutely fine. And I was doing my best to keep her updated. So screenshots from Trainline where I was. So from a passenger's perspective, one of the worst things an operating company can do is not tell the customers what's happening. Keeping you uninformed is way, way worse, I find, than telling the truth. Because at least then, if you're commuting, you're going to be late for work, that's one thing. But if you're traveling, you're going to be late for picking the kids up or getting to a doctor's appointment, that's a completely other thing. So being informed by whoever is your carrier of the day, it's their responsibility. And the less information they give you, the more they keep away from you, the worse it gets for you. And that's when your stress really rises.
So how can organisations take that back into
Talk
to
to
play?
us, tell us. From a very factual perspective, it is making sure that the onboard crew are up to date, that they know what the times are, therefore that the information is getting to the train crew staff. And to give them their dues, it doesn't always. Sometimes the people who are looking after us on the trains don't have up-to-date information. We all know what signals are like on trains. And you'll have some people who are travelling experts, let's say, who know really good websites to go to and will have to find the information out for themselves. So shout out to Open Train Times, for example, a geek friend who literally models where every train is in the UK. But it won't necessarily be on Trainline, or it won't necessarily be on your operator's website. So we do have to improve the source and the transmission of information, the availability of information, but also making sure that information is understandable. But then flip it round, because the poor people working on the trains, and I say that on purpose, they are faced with so many angry, stressed, worried, upset people. They themselves need psychological safety to be able to do their job properly and safely, but also they shouldn't be on the receiving end of other people's stress. It's never their fault.
But
The
that
train's delayed.
translates into the wider world of work, doesn't it?
Absolutely,
So whether
yeah.
you're working for a small organisation, whether you're working for a behemoth of an organisation as the NHS, it's the same. How can sort of leadership across organisations really enable that? How can we kind of really support? How can organisations really balance that?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to this term psychological safety, which, as academics, you two will understand way better than me. But one of the really popular references is a book called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. Have you both read that?
Yeah.
Which is brilliant, where it talks about there's no hierarchy. For example, you talk in first name terms. In fact, it's just a speak up culture. Everybody is empowered and safe to speak up. So if, I don't know, when I was a barmaid, if I saw a problem with one of the beer pumps and I knew that it was putting out mucky beer, I could tell the landlord that and not be worried about retribution, because we'd have to turn that off. That's a really basic example. But if you replicate that up into something where, like the NHS, where you do have really safety critical roles and responsibilities, being able to flag up a report, an issue, and know that you're not going to get the flack for it, you're actually going to get recognised for telling the truth and preventing further problems. That's what we need to do. We need to make sure we have these cultures of safety and trust, responsibility and reliability.
Because that's what drives good mental health, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
What should have been your biggest learn from your travels overseas?
That in a lot of countries, mental health isn't spoke about at all. I worked in a lot of low-income settings, some like conflict divided societies and conflict resolution stuff between Israel, Palestine, and in parts of Africa as well. And because the issues are so stark with what they are facing on a day-to-day basis, mental health isn't something that gets talked about. But even if you go to somewhere like Fiji, where I spent a lot of time, which sounds really idyllic, but it's quite a divided society, and there's a big population of Indian Fijian women there who just don't get a look in any shape or form in any like major areas of society. So it's these kind of lost groups that I think that that needs to be focused on sometimes, and I think that's where like conversations can be lost. You said earlier about intersectionality and the multiple oppressions that women face, but particularly women from marginalised groups, and I think that's the case of a lot of groups in low-income countries where there's not just our conversation we're having here, which we're very privileged to have, which is in workplace cultures. How can we reduce blame culture, and how can we make things more open and more candid in how we go about our jobs? But there's a lot of places around the world, but they're not even close to having those conversations. And that's why this is a privilege, and that's why, but it's still really important to discuss.
Yeah. What have you seen, Catherine, that you think, gosh, if I had that magic one? We were talking before we started recording, weren't we? I've been at something today. It's like, what would you do? what you want to see by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
What would you want to see
Yeah.
with your magic wand?
I think I am grateful of the fact that we have come a long way. I think when I started my training in 2000 to now, massive change. You're getting people, sort of important people, celebrities talking about mental health, and therefore more people opening up. What I would want to see in 2030, more and more people aware, being aware about mental health. Because if we are not aware, then we don't know what to look for. We don't know what to treat. And some of the statistics you showed was about, lifespan, just, 15 to 20 years earlier, because about a mental health condition. What I would want to is mental health is everyone's business. So that if I went somewhere, somebody else could see that maybe there's something here and they know exactly where to go. Just the same importance that we give physical health. We talk about physical first aid. There is mental first aid. How do we respond to everyone that way? More and more people are talking about it. There's podcasts everywhere talking about mental health. And in the communities that you refer to, yes, I think there's progress there as well. Maybe not at the pace that I would like.
No.
So 2020, everyone being aware with reducing the stigma as well, improving help seeking. Yeah.
And I think that word stigma is something that is always associated with mental health. And we talked earlier about, actually, I'm not going to say that because I'm a woman. I'm a woman from global majority, so I don't want to say that because I don't want to be weak. I'm a man. I don't want to say that because I'm weak. I don't want to do that because I don't want it to jeopardize my promotion opportunity or create conflict. How have you seen any great examples of how people have reduced that stigma, either within a small organisation, or large organisation, within a community?
Yeah. I'm going to use an example, and I think it's somebody you know, Simone. There's a lady called Heather War. Now, disclaimer, she's a really good friend of mine. She's a female freight train driver with a really strong Glaswegian accent. She's pretty cool. Scottish accent, sorry, not Glaswegian, she's from Edinburgh. Anyway, she is one very much of a minority in the freight train driving community. This is going back a couple of years now. She had the courage. She noticed in the mess room, one of the lads was quite quiet. And normally in that sort of, yeah, he'll be right. Let's just, will embarrass me if you ask him. But she actually approached him and asked him how it was and how he was. And it just, that tiny little seed of helping someone open up. And then there's this lovely phrase I picked up from somewhere called be the pebble. So, you're setting off these positive ripples by Heather asking this chap if he was okay. That then empowered him to say, actually, no, I'm not. I'm struggling, I'm not very happy. And then going on and across that team then started helping one another. And then that started a bigger ripple. That is one of the things I think that started a bit of a seismic shift across the rail community. It is okay to talk. And then things like Andy's Man Club and actively getting communities like Andy's Man Club to come in and talk to your colleagues. So I've always worked in male-dominated environments. My last job was working in a factory with loads of younger chaps aged between late teens to early 30s. We don't talk about that stuff. Well, actually, lads, you're gonna. Or you're going to hear from somebody who can tell you why you should talk about it and making it normal, normalising the conversation and not making people embarrassed.
And what did you learn? You were talking about one of the studies you did with a female sports team. Was that in Fiji?
In Fiji, yeah. Like it was. I was there to understand the role of sport in identity, but also a kind of lack of integration they had there between Indian people and Indigenous Islanders. And over the few months that I played in a rugby team there and a football team, an Indian team and an Indigenous team. But over the weeks and months, I went to schools and watched the PE lessons, and I just saw all the Indian women just sitting in the shade. They wouldn't even get changed for PE. And I was just like, you know what? Like this is a version of what happens in Western cultures as well, where it's like you're seen as smaller, weaker, and you don't want to do sport anyway, so you're kind of pushed to one side. And I think that sport can be a real vehicle for stereotypes and for maintenance of stereotypes around gender, around race. And I think that's something that we need to be careful of, which is why, going back to what you said, Lucy, was like those I think unexpected places are quite useful. So I think particularly with men, sorry to talk about men again, but that to go back to go back to them, I think when I know he's a controversial figure, but when Mike Tyson started talking about, not Mike Tyson, sorry, Tyson Fury, not Mike Tyson, sorry, excuse me, Tyson Fury started talking about his struggles. I thought, I may not agree with what everything this guy says, but there's lots of people who will watch him over lots of other people who they probably should have been listening to, but because they identify with someone like him, heavyweight champion of the world, hardest man ever, talking openly about his struggles. And I think that does resonate with people. Those kind of unexpected places that you don't necessarily see.
I wanted to touch on that influencer
Yeah.
celebrity
Yeah.
culture, because sometimes it's a bit like, is that just somebody's, like what their marketing strand is or
Yeah.
marketing brand is? What's your take on there?
Well, I think that's the power of, it's again an overused phrase, the power of vulnerability, showing that we all have our wobbles. Now, that the stats are 1 in 4 people are struggling with mental health.
Yeah.
As one of my colleagues flips around, that means 3 of us are actually all right now. And I really love that stance. That means 3 of us are capable of looking after and looking out for that one person. Then when that one person's back on the up, they become part of the 3 and somebody else. And it's, so whether it's somebody really, really famous, admitting or opening up to the fact that they're struggling with something, or someone that's within your circle, it's all the same. But with the example of Tyson Fury, it's that influencer and somebody completely left field to where you think this wishy-washy fluffy stuff is normally talked about. It's so important, and it does affect all of us. And arguably those communities or groups where they're less likely to talk about it need to talk about it more.
Well, it's the global reach of some of these people now. We're going back to talking about low-income countries or places where I might have been to or
Who
worked.
idolise.
Yeah, but you still get, it's a global reach of things like social media or YouTube, which has got all sorts of things wrong with it. But if you get the right messages going to the right places, then and loud enough as well, right? Because there's a lot of really awful noise out there as well, but there can be lots of really positive noise as well.
It's trying to turn the volume up on those good messages and the simple messages. Now, if we head to 2030, I know we didn't want to talk about that, Jack, but what?
No, I don't want to talk about that. Seems too soon.
I was asked that question today. It felt like a while ago, and I'm like, oh, flipping heck, it's only like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
What would you want to see?
I would like to see authenticity, something I'm obsessed with at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think we live in a really inauthentic world. A lot of our lives live online. We stay in touch, but we don't touch. We can communicate being in touch via one bit of a like, but it's not picking up the phone. It's not going to see someone. It's looking people in the eye, which is why when this webinar was said we're doing it in person, I thought, brilliant. I'm so much more happy to come when it's in person than not. So I'd like to see things that engage people with each other in person after such a long time of being online or kept at a distance. And I'd like to see different ways to approach mental health. And that sounds like a really obvious catch-all thing, but the stuff with the mixed martial arts and the amount of issues that the men had in it before they started training, and they're men that if you turned to them and said, and women, I'm sure women in there as well said the same thing, to be honest. If you said, right, if you go and sit in this room and talk to this other person you've never met about your feelings and tell them everything that's wrong with your life, most people, I think a lot of people go, I don't really want to do that. But go and do this activity, and you talk to yourself, Catherine, about the different approaches that you're taking towards this. Is go and do this activity, meet this group and do, I don't know, horse riding or play volleyball or go for a walk or I think Andy's Man Club do this as well. Do something that's not necessarily as intense as sitting opposite someone and telling them the deepest, darkest secrets about how you feel.
And if there's one thing that people watching today, whether watching or on catch up, and please do drop any of those questions, and we will catch up on in the chat on LinkedIn or on YouTube, wherever you're watching. What is the one thing you would say to, and it doesn't matter whether it's somebody who's going, I'm worried about someone, or I think I'm worried about me, or I'm a leader and I want to do something. What would you say? Because you can't do nothing. This is we said at the top here, this is a global crisis.
Yeah.
So what can...
So I'd look at all 3 of those elements. So first of all, the individual. You've got to put your own oxygen mask on first, haven't you? So before you go and look after someone else, make sure you're in the right frame of mind to do that. Because it's when you're asking someone how they are, it's about how they are, not like, oh, I know how you're feeling. You can empathise, but you put them front and centre. But then as a leader, that means you've got to recognise the importance of mental health support within the workplace, wellbeing support within the workplace. We know, like looking at cost of recruitment stats, average cost of recruitment is, if someone's on, these are very approximate figures from HR News today, average salary of around 31 grand, the cost of recruitment is around 5 grand. Actually, a mental health first aid training course for a few £100, you're going to retain a lot more staff by looking after them in that way than people leaving through stress and worry they're not doing right. But then if you do want to check in on somebody, whether you're an individual or as a leader, just do it. Just do it.
Just crack on, right?
Yeah, you're a human. Let's all just be human.
Jack, what's your shout out or ask to our our many, many followers and supporters out there?
Well, I think we talked a lot about gender. I've talked a lot about gender a bit today, and I think I'm not going to sit here and say that there's a crisis in male mental health, because there is, but there's also women suffer just as much, if not a lot more, in many areas. But I'd like those things to be treated somewhat in isolation, because there's both things are going on at the moment. Yeah, both things are going on at the moment. And as I say that, there's also universal things that we're struggling with, I think, in this world. And I think it's worth us looking at the stresses in our society and the world we've built, and how different we see ourselves from each other at times because of the way that we consume media. And I think that if people kind of relate to themselves more in more real and authentic ways, then people realize that they have a lot more in common than what divides them. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand. And I think that mental health depends a lot on that as well. Yeah. Going back to that thing we talk about, community, real community, not online communities.
Dr. Catherine?
I think for me, it's about, we've been talking about awareness, but awareness with action.
Yeah.
And I love the Action for Happiness website.
Yes.
And they produce this calendar every month with a theme. And every single day, there's an activity for you to do. And most really simple things to do that we can do on our own, but let's do it as a community. Have you smiled at somebody today? Have you taken a 10-minute walk today? There's an action plan, a daily action plan.
I do not know about this website, Action for Happiness.
It's amazing. I did an event with this organisation. I'm not going to lie, it must be nearly 20 years ago. Wow. And there was a young woman that came to the event that we were hosting. And this is a woman who I thought was so confident, so all over it, and I'm not a big fan of the imposter syndrome phrase, but, because I think it's another label. But she kind of went, you know what, I'm not all right. Yeah. I'm not all right. And she went away and she said to me, Simone, can I write a blog for you? And I went, for sure. She says, I've never written anything. ChatGPT didn't exist then. I didn't write it. And she wrote, being me is good enough. Yeah. And that was all on the back of that. Wow. It was those one little trigger. It's a trigger that inspired her to go, you know what, I can do something. And I think that's the premise of this is something, put your oxygen mask on. Yes. Don't do this in isolation. The authentic bit has really come across to me today, Jack. Yeah. But do something. Yeah, and it's an Action for Happiness should be our mantra for this.
It should be Action for Happiness. Everybody, what's the activity for today? Every time when I see it, I share it on my stories everywhere, on my contacts, so that we do it.
Deeds, not words.
Another really good one then, Imagine 5. I watch them on Instagram. So it's really good news stories, but usually with an environmental bent as well. Right, I think it's Uganda or Uruguay is now.
I need this in my life.
Oh, you go. Especially you with where you're going.
Absolutely. I just look at critical theory and stories all day.
Yeah, we need to play with your algorithms.
Yeah, I know. I need to play with my, oh, God.
But I need to add one more, though. As an addiction psychiatrist, when we do all these things, we're less likely to fall into that trap, the risk of another devastating condition that affects everyone, not just the individual, but the whole community. When we consistently do things that help us, we are less likely to fall into that trap.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
What words to close on. Dr. Catherine, Dr. Jack, Lucy MBE. We just had to even up the prefixes and suffixes. Amazing conversation today, but it does come with action. It does come with deeds. We all can do something. We can all be curious. We can all motivate and inspire some of those communities. We can all check in on the checkers is something we kind of talk very heavily about over lockdown, but I think it's something we have to keep on going. What we can't do is do nothing. Yeah, exactly. And we have to learn and pass on the skills and knowledge that you have today. Dr. Jack's got a reading list now for fun, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. A to-do list as well. A to-do list for sure.
Lucy, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry,
I hope you were relaxed now and in a great space.
I'm just going to hop in a train back now.
Yeah. You'll never get there. Train's terrible.
I've got the kids to feed.
Well, please, thank you so much for joining us. Please do keep this conversation going. This is not just about a chat for this period of time. This is actually following up with our amazing stellar panel and take some of those actions, make some of those small moves. Because sometimes it's the small things. It's not about changing everything right now because that can be too destabilizing. So please do follow us on all our socials. Follow Dr. Catherine's Action for Happiness tips every day. We are power_net on Instagram, and we are power on LinkedIn and Facebook and everything else. And please do use the hashtag today while driving this conversation. Hashtag we are power. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much to our amazing guests.